Our final speaker today is Vashti Kenway from Students of Palestine and Socialist Alternative, talking about perspectives for Palestinian liberation today.
Well, I'm just not exactly sure how to follow that, I have to say. And I think that after a speech like that, really when you just feel like doing nothing more except for running out the door and, trying to find every supporter of Israel and have an argument with them, or, get out to every Max Brenner shop and, do something to their doors, or, whatever it might be, I think that we can feel, or I think the other response that we can have is to feel impotent in the face of the kind of brutality that we see on our news. But on the other hand, I think the sort of stories that Saeed told today really gives meaning to the words that it is better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. And for people like Saeed, that is not an empty slogan. That is something which is lived and felt every single day. And so I think it's a real honour to have Saeed here today. But more than that, I actually think people in Australia have some serious work to do. And I think a lot of the work that we have to do is to wage particular political arguments. Because one of the most difficult things that I think a lot of people find here in Australia is to make head and tail of the actual situation and what is going on. And I think we have an argument to make that what is going on in Palestine, the situation there, is not a struggle between age-old rivals that's based on some sort of religious difference. It is not an incomprehensible sort of millennia-old battle. What is actually going on is a struggle between the oppressed and the oppressors. It is a struggle between a colonised population and their colonisers. It is a struggle between the indigenous people of Palestine and a settler population. It is a struggle between the biggest imperialist power in the world and a ravaged, savaged and belittled people. And that has to be the starting point for any argument that we leave this room to make today. This is not a battle between equal forces. This is a battle that you have to take a side on. You have to stand absolutely and unambiguously with people like Saeed and with the very brave individuals who are standing up against those tanks every single day of their lives. So I think that has to be the starting point. But I also think we have to understand that the situation is not one that we can sit by and just see how it progresses, because the intention of the Israeli state is to inflict full-scale genocide on the population of Palestine. And I don't use that word lightly. That is a word which, as John Pilger used it, actually, it refers to a slow and creeping genocide. And the word genocide actually means to fully and without any remit to absolutely obliterate an entire people. And that project of violence, that project of genocide, is one that the Israeli government is actually very clear about using. They are attempting to wipe out the Palestinians by both physical annihilation through the wars, by the sorts of terrorist gangs that Reem talked about that occurred in 1948, but more than that, they are attempting to wipe them out culturally and politically. And actually, in the latest round, I think Leah Petty on the opening night of Marxism 2012 called it a circus, a three-ring circus, and I think that's definitely what it is, the Republican nominations for the American elections. And they both, two of the main contenders in that race, Newt Gingrich and Rich Santorum, actually both commented on the Palestinian situation. And Newt Gingrich actually took to the airways to declare the Palestinians an invented people. Rick Santorum, not to be outdone, clearly, in his racist hyperbole, actually said that all of the people who live in the West Bank, like Saeed, are Israelis and not Palestinians. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there is a reality to all of this situation that cannot be denied. And the fact is that Israel is a racist and exclusivist state. It is not a state that can be reasoned with, and it is not a state that can be negotiated with. It is a state that actually needs to be overthrown. And so just as with the South African state, Just as with the South African apartheid state, the slogans that the anti-apartheid movement raised were not, let's sit down and negotiate with these racists who are actually trying to wipe the black population and put them into situations and contexts where they have absolutely no rights, where they're treated worse than animals. The slogan was that the South African apartheid regime needed to be torn down and it needed to be got rid of in toto. And I think we need to have the same sorts of political arguments here in Australia. But far from the apartheid state of Israel being a pariah on the international scene, the Israeli state is a state with friends in very high places, the highest of places, in fact. One of Israel's most powerful friends is the US government, which has a bipartisan policy of support for Israel. And I think, again, we need to be very clear. This is not just the likes of Rick Santorum or Newt Gingrich who support Israel. Obama, just after his election to office, went and gave a speech at one of the peak Israeli funding bodies in the United States and pledged billions more dollars to the support of Israel. The USA is undeniably the paymaster of Israel. It's the financial, military and diplomatic might of the world's biggest capitalist power that allows and encourages Israel to behave in the manner that it does. And between the year of 2000 and 2009, the US actually transferred more than 670 million weapons, rounds of ammunition and related equipment to Israel. And a lot of the weaponry that actually gets fired on the demonstrations in places like Neilin actually comes direct from the United States. And so I think we have to understand why that support exists, because a lot of people say, well, actually, the situation is that Israel is the paymaster of the United States. They're the ones who are, pulling all the strings. And I think we have to be clear and to reject that as well. Israel plays an absolutely vital role for the United States in the region. The region is very important for world capitalism because it is the place that actually sits on millions and millions and millions of barrels of oil. And this is an area of the world that all of the big colonists, all of the big powers across the world have constantly attempted to scramble over and get control of. Israel plays an absolutely vital role for the United States in that power play. And so we have to not only say that Israel is a problem, but also the paymasters of Israel are a problem too, and that all of the imperialist powers across the Middle East need to be kicked out. But it's not just the United States that supports Israel, and I think here we have to make a very special mention of our own Australian government in backing up. Well, shame before we even get there, but Julia Gillard is an absolutely big-time supporter of Israel. She, on the anniversary of Israel's birthday, Julia Gillard, out of the greatness of her own heart, actually bought a big cake that had special icing, congratulating Israel on 50 or 60 years or whatever it was of its founding. Julia Gillard, more than that, when the Gaza war occurred, refused to come out and condemn Israel and actually said that Israel had a right to, in her words, defend itself. So clearly the situation in Australia is that we have an absolutely across-the-board bipartisan policy of both Labor and Liberal parties giving unconditional support to the Israeli state. And so, again, we're up against some pretty big enemies across the world. But finally, I think it has to be said that for the Palestinians' situation, they are up against some enemies within their own ranks. There are actually Palestinian forces inside of Gaza and the West Bank that are collaborating with Israel and the United States. And these collaborators, the wealthy Palestinians who head up organisations like Fatah and some of the leaders of Hamas, it has to be said as well, and also some of the left groups who Saeed was telling me the other day absolutely disgracefully refused to support the Syrian revolution and actually had demonstrations in support of Assad, which Saeed actually mentioned that he and some of his friends went down and had a little confrontation with them, showed them what they thought. That all of these sections of the Palestinian movement also need to be opposed. So there is a very big task up against supporters of Palestine across the world. And so I think their political argument about what can be done in this context and in this situation really matters, because again, it can seem totally overwhelming. We're up against the biggest military force in the world, we're up against our own governments here in Australia, and the Palestinians who are on the ground fighting the occupation have their own ruling classes and their own governments to oppose as well. So this can all seem like a pretty big call. So we have some enemies. But I think it is also important to recognise that we have some pretty powerful friends as well. And here I'm not talking about anyone who's in power across the Middle East or in Australia or in the United States. Here I'm talking about the friends that we have in the form of the Egyptian revolutionaries. And here's Reham, who spoke yesterday, who's actually one of the organisers in Australia of solidarity with the Egyptian revolution. Because the whole network of support for Israel across the Middle East was shaken on the 25th of January when Mubarak was overthrown. That network of support extends to the rich and powerful that they have for Israel, extends right across the region and across the world. And what scared Israel more than anything else, what put pause in their steps towards the villages of Nalin, what made them think a little bit more about their operations and what they were going to do, was the revolutionary struggle of the people across the Middle East, in Tunisia and in Egypt and in all of the other countries that followed suit. Those revolutions gave massive inspiration to the people of Palestine, and what's more, it showed that actually dictators could be overthrown. It shows that one of the most powerful forces in the region could actually be got rid of. And that is no light feat. There were people across the world that were saying that Mubarak was actually one of the strongest dictators and he would never fall. Well, about a month later, they had egg on their face. And that was a moment of extreme significance for the Palestinian struggle as well, because what opened up into that space, into that gap, was the possibility of the people who are actually on the ground, the Egyptian revolutionaries, inserting themselves into the process of history and starting to say, we demand that all of the networks of support for Israel be got rid of, be overthrown, and that actually the possibility of, for instance, breaking down those walls, breaking open the borders. And there are borders which actually are on the border between Palestine and Egypt, that they could actually be opened. And 1 week, actually, after the overthrow of Mubarak, there were demonstrations on the ground inside of Cairo in support of the Palestinians. There were people gathering who said one of the tasks that we now need to do to both fight for our own liberation and for the liberation of the Palestinian people is to march down to the border and to break it open and to say this is one of the demands of the revolutionary Egyptian people. They also had a major demonstration outside of the Israeli embassy, which happened, I think, in March or April of last year. One of our comrades, Corey Oakley, actually participated in that demonstration. And there were hundreds and hundreds of revolutionary Egyptians who marched on the Israeli embassy and had the audacity to actually raise the Palestinian flag over that Israeli embassy in a massive and wonderful show of defiance. So there is a real connection between the uprisings that are currently occurring across the Middle East, which actually say to all of the corrupt and old leaders and officials of all of the old parties that have led the Palestinian struggle down the wrong path, that have said negotiations are the solution, all of these sorts of independent forces are the kind of forces that need to build up their links and their networks in opposition to the links and the networks that are built from above, to say that we stand in solidarity with each other, our liberation is bound up in your liberation, and for all of the winds of the Arab Spring to sweep through and remove all of those old and corrupt dictators, and to take with it all of the walls, all of the tanks, all of the bulldozers, and to sweep them right off the face of this planet, so that we can actually live in a world which is free of the kind of oppression that we can all shine like Saeed clearly does.